I would like to see more. I would like to see more kind of younger folks like getting into Bitcoin.
Everybody is talking about the deficit, at least from like many years ago. And last year, the election, it was all about deficits. And then we come to this like one beautiful bill that's going to add like trillions and trillions of dollars over 10 years to the deficit.
We could also start expanding horizontally. I feel like it's a lot of urban cities now are only expanding vertically. You'll have like higher and higher condos and things like that, because like the risk to be able to like build away from like a major metropolitan is becoming too much, versus, you know, for a fact, this small little like shoebox condo can sell for over $500,000 in Toronto specifically. I know that for a fact.
I think that's actually the problem in society, right? If society is just like, oh, government's going to solve this problem for me, then it never gets solved.
So Matt, you were just back from the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. I heard so many cool things about it, and yeah, let us know what you learned.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wasn't even at the conference that much, but it was a huge event, really great. They shut down the whole strip for J.D. Vance coming in. A lot of big names in town. But honestly, I think the biggest alpha was probably at the open source stage, where you had a lot of core developers, you know, just developers in the Bitcoin ecosystem in general, actually talking about the things that matter to Bitcoin, the protocol, and Bitcoin Core, and why we need certain upgrades. Yeah, overall, really great. It's kind of funny to have a Bitcoin conference that's all about sound money right next to the gambling machines. That's all about, you know, spending your money as quickly as possible. But, you know, I think it's a good venue. You've got, you know, lots of space and, you know, lots of opportunities for side events too.
It's good. And how many, and like, which one is this one that you can, like third one, fourth one?
I think I went to one in San Francisco back in 2018 or 2019, and then Miami in like 21 or 22. And then I think this has been my third, you know, Bitcoin Magazine conference. They've been putting out some great conferences, and obviously attracted, you know, Donald Trump actually to the conference last year, which I think was a huge win. That's the first time, you know, a presidential candidate has ever been to a Bitcoin conference. You know, a lot of people, you know, kind of disagree with his speech at the time, but, you know, I think it is a monumental occasion for sure.
I think it's also super cool. I remember I saw a picture like from the first ever Bitcoin conference. There's like 3-4 people on the stage, versus with now there's like huge riots.
Oh yeah, that was with Andreas Antonopoulos. So
Yeah.
he started, he did a Bitcoin conference way back in like 2012 or something, and was explaining Bitcoin to people. He's a guy who spent a lot of time and just educating people on Bitcoin. And then yeah, it's like, you know, nobody showed up, and yeah, if you had showed up and you bought a little Bitcoin, you would have been incredibly rich. So, you know, just goes to show, you know, focus on the signal, focus on like the actual, you know, aspects of Bitcoin itself, the protocol, how it works. You know, the price at the end of the day is noise. We all know Bitcoin's eventually going to go to, you know, $1 million, $13 million, but it's going to take time. And in the meantime, you know, it's the code, and it's the, you know, the people running it that matter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And what are some of the new stuff, man, that you have learned from the conference? So I heard there are many things that they announced this year. Some of the new things that they announced.
Yeah, new things. Not too much. I mean, I think there was a good continued covenant discussion, right? So what is the next soft fork to Bitcoin going to be? How are we going to secure our Bitcoin, you know, for the next 100 years? There was the whole, you know, alt return debate, which was basically like, okay, do we consider data that goes on the blockchain to be spam, or is that totally fine? There's a big discussion around, you know, well, there's not, on one hand, we're worried about spam on the blockchain. On the other hand, there isn't a lot of actual block space being used up. You know, fees are super low right now, which has its pros and cons. And then I think there were just a couple other announcements. I know like Strike did some announcements. They were super stoked about getting their Bitcoin backed loan solution out and running. And then obviously we had Ross Ulbricht, you know, the guy who was in jail for 11 years from the Silk Road, you know, from being, you know, basically having 2 life sentences plus 40 years to actually speaking at the Bitcoin conference. You know, it really was a monumental moment for libertarians and Bitcoiners alike. And I would say also there was several individuals at the conference that would not be there if it was not for the current administration, right? A perfect example is Ross Ulbricht. Another one was Paolo, the CEO of Tether. And the third one would be Justin Sun from Tron. I think for some time he was the ambassador to one of the Caribbean islands. So he had diplomatic immunity, but that was removed. And so, but other than the Trump administration, he was able to actually come and speak. I actually went to one of the events. I think I was the only non-Asian there, and everyone was speaking Mandarin. So my buddy had to translate for me, but that was fun.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I think Matt, a lot of so I actually went to Qatar as well, and the consensus that I had there was like, Qatar Economic Forum was most people there are in the 40s and 50s, which I think sinks back to our pod. It's like, I don't really see that many young people in Qatar Economic Forum for those sort of traditional finance conference. What did you see in Vegas as the most young people, and what do you think it means for like young generation?
I think the young generation, I would say mostly folks in their 30s and 40s. Like I would say Bitcoin is one of those things where there was a lot of young people into it like a decade ago, and those people grew up, right? You had them basically grow up to now become in their 30s. Like those that were being on it in their 20s doing Bitcoin core development are now in their 30s. And so there's a lot of folks in that. I would say like myself, like I'm one of the younger people at the conference. And so, yeah, I would like to see more. I would like to see more kind of younger folks like getting into Bitcoin. I think what's going on is a lot of younger folks are getting into more like alternative things. Like they're getting into, more interesting new cryptocurrencies, right? Like the Polkadots, the Ethereums, the Solanas of the world. There's a lot of like younger folks in their 20s that are getting into those things. And Bitcoin is kind of seen as boomer coin. It's not seen as the new thing anymore. And I think that's unfortunate because I think, most of those other coins in the very long term are going to have a hard time competing against Bitcoin just as a store of value. But I think at the end of the day, the folks that are, really kind of into all those other coins, like they do hold a little bit of Bitcoin. And so it's just about, hey, how can we convince them to hold a little bit more at the end of the day?
And I think don't you see like, one perspective they might have is like, oh, Matt, maybe you got into Bitcoin many, many years ago when it was still cheap. Right. Yeah. So if I'm a young person, I just graduated from high school, Bitcoin is at $100,000. For a young person, $100,000 is a lot of money. And it might take a while to get to just like one Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, I would just like, I think this is a big problem too, is like the visibility, right? People have this idea in the back of their head that, Ethereum is cheaper and Solana is cheaper because it's only $100, it's only $2,000. Bitcoin is not infinitely divisible, but it's very divisible. You can, divide it into units of 100,000. There's 1,000, it's about 1,000 Satoshis for every dollar in it, right? So you can buy 50 cents worth of Bitcoin. You can buy 1 cent worth of Bitcoin. That's about 10 sats. So I wouldn't be worrying too much about, in fact, if you think about it that way, Bitcoin's still cheap because for a single dollar, you can still get 1,000 sats, 1,000 of the base unit of Bitcoin. And so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Bitcoin's $100,000. We're still early. Bitcoin's still in the long term, it's going to go to 1 million. It's going to go to 13 million. It's just about, like, buying it and waiting for the next 4, 8, 12 years. And I know that sounds really hard. And I know that it requires like a lot of patience. But I do think it's still on track to outperform, S&P 500, to outperform basically any asset that's been in existence, to outperform gold in the long term. I do believe that Bitcoin is a better store of value at the end of the day than gold, because it is, it is the most scarce asset, whereas gold, you'll always be able to mine more of it at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. And how do you think about like being like, the younger person in Ronaldo to Zom right after? Because this time when I was in Doha, I was in Qatar. It certainly does feel that, being like this young does carry a little bit of weight to you when everyone around you is like kind of like more and more established and, like older than you. Right. So I guess like, okay, how do you think of that yourself? Go to you first and so on.
Like, how do you break in? Like, how do you set yourself apart, you mean?
Yeah. How do you acknowledge that, okay, like I'm like 10 years, I'm 20 years younger than those folks. And it's like sort of like a gap that you have to like cross over. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's necessarily true for Bitcoin. Just saying like in general, I think for those conferences and events.
Well, I always feel that there's a certain divide between the devs and the non-devs, and I think there's certainly a kind of an aspect of there's a higher level of technical knowledge for those that are younger than those that are older, right? So those that are older that are, and then there's exceptions to this, right? Some of the best Bitcoin core devs are, in their 40s, 50s. And so it's just a situation about like kind of finding common ground. I think a lot of the older folks in Bitcoin are more looking at it from an economic perspective, right? So what are the libertarian aspects that they like about it? What are the economic aspects that they like about it? What do they like about the scarcity? What do they like about the adoption that's occurring with things like MicroStrategy, and other Bitcoin treasury companies? And so, it's really coming from that different mindset. But I think even more than age, I don't really think age is actually the biggest kind of divider, in the room. It's more about where are you coming from, and then everyone coming together and focusing on Bitcoin. You might come from a libertarian background. You might come from Wall Street. You might be a developer. You might be in the energy sector, right? You might be working on flare gas, and doing something with Bitcoin for mining, right? You might be doing stuff with hardware. I got the opportunity to tour actually a Bitcoin mining or not a Bitcoin mining, but a Bitcoin mining ASIC manufacturing company based in Silicon Valley that's actually building chips in America, kind of for the first time, basically. So you might be coming from that background. So there's many different backgrounds that everyone's coming from, and everyone's coming to these conferences and they're learning from each other. They're finding out, okay, where are the gaps in my knowledge missing? Where I might be missing something on the libertarian aspect, or someone else might be missing something on the technical side. And so I think it's really great to fill in that knowledge.
Yeah. Let's also talking more about like some of the conferences that you've been, right? Because in the business world, I'm sure like I went to economic forums, it's more about like economics and macroeconomics and global, trade. Whereas you might go to some of the conferences and think, which are the ones that you just did?
Oh yeah, I've been to like some like arbitration conferences, things more in like the litigation specific places. And I will say, just in general, I think almost all conferences you go to, like people that are flying out to like different cities around the world, there'll be people with more capital, so they'll be older. I think that's just like a common like aspect. Bitcoin's probably one like the few one-off situations where a lot of young people are able to get into it. And even by young, I mean like even like early 30s would still be considered young, right? In a space like this. I think the aspect to really start thinking about is like what Matt was saying is, yeah, Bitcoin being the boomer coin, quote unquote. I don't think that's the way people think about it. I think Bitcoin has kind of like become, as crypto as like a investment vehicle has become bigger, Bitcoin is kind of like the market return. And so if you want to beat the market, you go for more risky things, right? I think back like 10, 15 years ago, people would buy penny stocks, people would buy just like, you'd pick specific companies you think you can beat versus the S&P 500. That was your market return, right? And so for a long time, that was like your store of value. As we see that shift towards Bitcoin, yeah, people still are, like the younger you are, the more, I guess like confidence or delusion you have, both for like the good and the bad that comes with it. But yeah, that kind of behavior is always good and bad because that's the way you get disruptive technology as well, right? But I think there's good and bad aspects to having people start like experimenting with other cryptos too. And maybe like one of the greatest ones would be like stablecoin. I think that's like a very exciting aspect that's starting to be built in. And we're able to see like the plumbing can really start being hammered together and to be like institutionalized so that crypto can really elevate to the next level.
Yeah. So when I was in Qatar, I guess the theme I was feeling is like, okay, I'm younger than most people, which is a good thing because I have more time than those people, right? So there's more time I can try around different things. Whereas like when you're in your 50s, it's kind of a luxury. And on the other hand, it's like more like a capital perspective, right? So like they have more capital than me, probably, I'm thinking. They have probably more capital than me, and they're probably able to allocate it much better, right? And we saw like, sovereign governments and decision makers that are able to make like long-term bets, who are obviously sending on more like higher level than just like individuals, right? So I definitely thought about this kind of a lot about like, okay, like as a young person, like how do I break out into those conversations, into like the relationships that are really being happening, right? So that's something I actually quite struggle with. Yeah.
Well, when I think like for folks of that age too, they're being more risk averse, right? So they're saying like, okay, well, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. basically you should have diversification of your assets, right? You should have some in Bitcoin, some in stocks, some in real estate. But for someone who's young, like you kind of have an advantage in terms of having if everything goes to hell, you still got time at the end of the day, right? So, if you go all in on Bitcoin, hypothetically, and that works out for you, then great. If it doesn't, well, you still have time to rebuild. So, you're able to take those higher risks, earlier in your career. And so like, why not? Like, why not take those risks? And die tomorrow doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
But if you're going to live until you're 80 years old, you might as well take those risks, and shoot for the moon.
Yeah, I agree. But like, so wouldn't you say our society has been wiring us differently with the form of like, media influences and things we got taught in school, that the S&P 500 is the North Star and has been performing, ever since, I don't know, ever since there was dinosaurs. And in that environment, and also the advice that you got from your parents and grandparents are vastly different than perhaps what you would have made the decision yourself, right? So from your perspective, how can young people break out of that, like the loop that basically traps them and like just really think about it themselves?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. I think the question is much more systemic, even just because of the fact that it feels like the world that kids are going to be growing up into today is so different from even just like 15 or 20 years ago when we were growing up. I think I saw a study, the fact that right now kids, like teenagers, have like a 0.1 mile radius from their house or their parents, because like, kids will play video games, they'll stay at home much more. Versus when I was a kid, you'd go into the forest, you just run away from home. Not like they're running away from home, just like, you go outside till like the sun comes down, and then you're back home for dinner. And so it's this idea that that same exploration doesn't happen. And if you're just stuck, like isolated, and you're scrolling through social media, you're going to be seeing like the 1% of the 1%. Like that one kid, like Jack Doherty is first person I can think of. It's a Twitch streamer and he's made like millions, right? You're thinking, oh wait, no, this is so simple. And you're just going to start comparing yourself to only this one person. You're not actually living in the present, in the moment itself. And it becomes hard, especially, and we've talked about this so much with like fiat, like the level of inflation right now has actually been more than any point in history I can think of in the past 100+ years. And if you're in such a worrying constant tense like that, where, if you're a young person, you don't really dream of a home anymore. You just assume that's not realistic. And so you're just kind of always in like a hustle mindset. It becomes hard to just turn that off and just live in the moment almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's pretty sad that there's enough people that are kind of in that camp of thinking they're never going to own a home. It's like, what causes those things? It's like low interest rates, but also just this mindset of everyone basically in society going and focusing on an investment being real estate, right? So if you have low interest rates, you have real estate being considered the investment, you have people levered up on that. Well, there's no wonder that you're going to have a situation where your average young person isn't going to be able to, buy real estate. And I think like this really comes into looking at, imagine if we had an optimal society. In an optimal society, you would want to have a situation where, the cost of living or the cost of housing wasn't exorbitantly high, especially for young people, especially if you want to have, the population, the national population of a country increase, right? We have the population rates of the birth rates of countries all around the Western world plummeting dramatically. Often you would have it much higher, but a lot of people put off having kids because they can't afford a home. How do you think you're going to afford kids, right? And so we've basically, and then we make up for the lack of, natural births by having substantial immigration. And so it's like, that's not really a great situation for any society, essentially. And now if we rethink this and we think, okay, well, imagine if real estate was not the primary core investment that people, right? The majority, think about it, the majority of people in the Western world, their primary investment is their home.
Yeah.
The majority of their net worth is tied up in their house, which is, in my opinion, insanity. If that was not the case, if housing was actually cheap and the majority of your wealth was held in something like Bitcoin, then we could have a situation where more and more people are able to live closer to their work, are able to live closer to their friends, are able to live closer to the things that they care about. And you have a sense of community that comes back instead of everyone just being focused on the investment aspect of real estate. And I think you can actually return to normalcy in terms of, people's living standards, and the birth rates would go up. So I mean, that's what I hope Bitcoin does long term.
And one thing I'll say also is just the idea that your house is more than just, if your house stops being your utility value plus this like store of value and it goes discounts back to utility value, we could also start expanding horizontally. I feel like it's a lot of urban cities now are only expanding vertically. You'll have like higher and higher condos and things like that, because like the risk to be able to like build away from like a major metropolitan is becoming too much, versus, for a fact, this small little like shoebox condo can sell for over $500,000 in Toronto specifically. I know that for a fact.
Well, what's the same in Toronto too, because basically like the cost that people are willing to pay is lower than the cost of development now, which is why all these developers are taking, shortcuts all along.
Yeah.
Right? Like certain condos only have heating or only had cooling at any one time because they didn't, take the extra work to put in both of them, right? It's ridiculous. And you have all this red tape that exists in government. That's, before you even start building anything, it's like $400,000 of red tape for an environmental assessment, for an assessment of the roadways, assessment of all these different things that contractors are being paid out to do. And it's like, okay, well, where as a society do you find that balance?
Yeah, I think, Matt, like, what is the solution? I guess the Matt first and then so, what is the solution to all these like problems? Because like it's not something that just happened in the last like 5 years. I think it's been like more systemic. It's been like at least the past 10 years or more. And I think like for young people, the question shouldn't just be between leaving and not leaving. Like leaving, I guess I can see the benefits of it, right? But obviously, it's not for everybody. And if you're not leaving, like, how can you actually make a difference? How can you tell the government or the people in charge that, listen to us, that we're actually important, like, don't ignore us and, do the other way.
I don't think government solves it. When has government ever solved something? When it has, if you just go, and I think that's actually like a problem in society, right? If society is just like, oh, government's going to solve this problem for me, then it never gets solved, because you're just going to sit there and you're going to push for the election of some politician that's going to promise X, Y, Z thing, and then they don't end up doing it, right? And so, I don't know what the solution is. Like, maybe it's, like, I think in general, if you just reduce society and government, you have more things that are done privately or more things that are done through donations, or if there's actually an incentive for things to be built, then that's a better place to come from. I think an example of this is people always say, well, who's going to build the roads, right? Like, this is like the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, right? Like mindset. Oh, you can't have a libertarian society. You can't have an anarcho-capitalist society because who's going to build the roads? Well, maybe if there's enough incentives, then people would figure out how to take the reinvention of Roman roads that rebuild themselves. The limestone literally rebuilds themselves, and we would have companies that are set up like building roads like that. But there's not really incentive for that, because the government wouldn't even want that today, because it wouldn't eliminate jobs, right? So you have this insane like incentive systems in place. And I think it's also like we need to like upgrade as a society, right? Like maybe, like just as an example, 300 years ago, if you had gone to someone from the South and you had said, we're going to need to eliminate slavery, they would have said, it's not economically feasible. We can't do it. Well, that didn't really matter, because it was not morally okay. And humanity came to the point where they realized that it was not morally okay. So perhaps it's a situation where we need governments to get to the point of, where humanity is going to get to the point of that, large government is immoral, or large taxation of the people is immoral. And that's the way that we move forward in figuring out how to solve these problems.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that makes sense. Like, I personally think governments, like, they tend to become bigger. I don't know where in the world you can see like this, like governing small governments, right? And some people might be, we're in Europe. But they're part of the union. Most of the small countries, you can say like Norway and Sweden and all that, they're part of the union.
Well,
it's a huge government.
Well, and they have huge taxation too, right? At all the, look at Norway, Sweden, um, Denmark, they all have like insane taxations, about 50%, right? Now, do they have like really nice societies and high quality of living? Yes. Um, so like, where do you find that balance? And it feels to me like the government never becomes smaller. And even when you have situations like we just said, Elon Musk come in to the Trump administration and try to cut a bunch of funding. Well, how did that end up? What's the latest on that, actually?
Yeah, I think, I think they are still fighting. I think Elon is apparently retreating on the fighting a little bit, but now we don't know what's going on. Well, I guess my takeaway of that, so I want to shoot your thoughts on this, like, everybody is talking about the deficit, at least from like many years ago. And last year, the election was all about deficits. And this year is all about growth, it's all about government efficiency. And then we come to this like one beautiful bill that's going to add like trillions and trillions of dollars over 10 years to the deficit. And yeah, I'm just like, I'm quite puzzled, Salon. I guess, does that mean like the government never actually gets down to just about the electrics?
Yeah, and I think that's the problem we've said like a couple of times. When you have a short-term like vision, and I like the public markets are similar, right? The idea that if every quarter you have to just say an update, your incentives become very different from like the overall strength of your company long term. So I always think there's always like a flaw in those two incentives not being aligned. I think the bigger like almost solution, it sounds very simple in aspect, is at a point, government should be able to prove why a law should also stay in place. I think like this idea, I think has been catching momentum. Just an expiration date for like rules and regulations. It makes sense. Like what you were saying, Matt, there's so much red tape, bureaucracy, even just to build a house. For some of these rules, they were from like the 1890s that don't even matter anymore. And it makes no sense because you're artificially inflating jobs so your unemployment looks better, but the way you're doing is by everybody collectively having higher taxation, as you're saying, Matt, where the idea of saying, oh yeah, let's lower taxes seems unheard of. The fact that income tax isn't like something that was permanently a thing people used to pay, right? These things just come and then you kind of get used to it, becomes docile. Like, I remember there's this one experiment I was reading about, I think it's kind of famous. They put 7 monkeys inside of like a cage and they put like a banana all the way at the top, right? And then there was a ladder and like monkeys would go up, try to grab the banana. Every time that a monkey did grab the banana, there was a punishment, like a bunch of hoses would spray these monkeys. But what then they ended up doing is, then they replaced 2 monkeys that were from the original 7 with like 2 brand new monkeys. Obviously, they tried to climb and get the banana. The other 5 monkeys punished those 2 monkeys, saying, without even any of the actual humans coming in to punish them. And you keep replacing the original monkeys with new monkeys that don't even know why grabbing the banana is wrong, monkeys that have never been punished for it, but they artificially just beat each other up the moment somebody tries to grab that banana, which is just out of their own self-interest would be good at that point, right? So at a point, I think the onus has to be on the government to prove why this regulatory thing should be there. Like regulatory capture should not be permanent. And I think that what you're saying then, George, like the end goal of that is what leads to a deficit. You have this committee that needs X amount of money. And when you start, like I sat in on committee meetings, what ends up happening is you end up just at the end of the year, if you haven't used the budget, you find a way to use the budget because you know then or else next year you're not going to get that budget. And so whatever money you get one year will always be the same amount, if not more, constantly going forward. And if you don't have a reason to actually prove why it's important, people will always just keep giving it to you and it just is going to grow. It's never actually going to subside.
Yeah, I think the problem also is like, I think we're all going into a two-party system.
Yeah.
Here in Canada, we just have the election where it's basically becoming a two-party system now. And in the US, obviously, two-party system. Around the world, I think we're seeing more two-party systems. But I think more important than two-party system is that we're seeing there's like consensus among two parties, right? Basically, you can, like, as a voter, you can only pick one or two. And if the two are the same, if the two stands the same on a certain issue, such as a deficit, then nothing is ever going to be done about this issue, which we can see it from the US. Trump is not going to do anything about deficits. Whoever comes next is not going to do anything about deficits. So it just ever goes on, right? And in Canada, we probably have the same thing with immigration. Nobody's going to do anything with immigration. And then it just keeps going on. And as a voter, there's nothing you can really do.
Well, the thing is, too, is governments are going to just find more and more ways to increase their own spending and justify it by increasing taxes in one way or another. I don't know if you guys heard about Australia and the unrealized gains tax that was just introduced on people's retirement funds. If you have over $3 million in your retirement fund, that is now taxed with unrealized gains. What is unrealized gains? Well, it means that even if you didn't sell, they're still taxing you on the gain that you made for the previous fiscal year, which to me is insanity because, okay, well, am I getting money back for an unrealized loss? No, absolutely not. This is insanity. And the thing is, this is what they always do. They put it at like a reasonably high number, like, oh, this is only for, if you're in your retirement account, you have more than $3 million. And, oh, if we look at it, 90% of Australians don't have more than 9%, more than 3 million. So we're only, taxing the top 10%. Well, originally when income tax came in around World War II, actually around World War I, it was only for the 1%. So here we are again. How much inflation is going to need to occur before that unrealized gains tax is affecting every single Australian in the country?
I think that's a really good point, and I think Matt, like we keep talking about like problem, right? And I think our listeners might be like, okay, like Matt, George, so I'm like, what are your thoughts about how can I as a person, right? Like, how can I as a person mitigate those problems? And I personally think it's a very important thing is that, okay, if you know the system is not working and you're stuck in a two-party system where neither party is going to do anything about it. So let's start with something like, what do you say to the people, or what are things maybe you're looking at how yourself, when we're in this situation where the economy is not doing well and you're a little bit like pessimistic about the future in terms of the economy. What do you do yourself?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to one thing we were saying like beforehand too a couple of times is like for Australia specifically, it always leads to the idea of capital flight. People that can afford it will actually end up like leaving the country, and then who's gonna end up like carrying the burden will be the middle class. It always ends up like that, and like it seems easy. Like I feel like to be able to say the idea that, oh, you should just be able to like vote with your passport, like go to another country that wants to take you. And I feel like, for example, like El Salvador is becoming very open for like immigration. A lot of countries that seem like they're the up and newcomers in the 21st century going forward. And it seems easy to say for like young people. And I think I still would give that advice to young people that have no actual ties to a country. If the two-party system seems like it's not working at all for you, I've actually become a bit more optimistic in Canada specifically. I actually think Mark Carney started representing Canada very well. But I agree. I think America is becoming intense to like live there as an American. And if you don't have a tie to it, yeah, the idea of leaving might be there. But if you feel patriotic too, like there really isn't much to do except let your voice be heard. I mean, we've seen social media does have power, right? Like the reason why Trump did win was social media, podcasting, things along those lines.
Yeah, and social media is that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I would think like leaving shouldn't be the only way. If you're not optimistic about the future of the country that you're in, I always think there should be a way that you can set up something that's like very sovereign, while minimizing your personal downside risks. Hypothetical scenario, the new George might only have 10% in Canadian dollars. Maybe New George will have a lot of money in Bitcoin or the US dollars or, whatever currency that, makes sense.
Well, here's the problem though, is that, so say you try to, like that's what people try to do, right? Is they try to minimize their exposure, right? So you might only have 10% Canadian dollar and just hypothetically, let's say you have 90% of Bitcoin. Well, you've managed to escape the inflation that is occurring with Canadian dollars, but they still come after you for a portion of that of capital gains. And the situation is that the more the Canadian government screws up and the value of the Canadian dollar goes down, the more they tax you, right? So it's a perverse incentive where the more they inflate the currency, the more they take from the people, which is a bizarre incentive to put in place in any economy, right? The Canadian dollar used to be parity, CAD USD 1-to-1. Now it's like, 67 cents on the dollar? So like we're being penalized in capital gains tax for avoiding the massive losses in comparison to the US dollar that the Canadian government costs. And then like you try to look at like all the structures, right? So, you look at setting up an offshore entity, Now that has to be reported to the IRS or CRA wherever you live. As an American, you're screwed because no matter where you go in the world, you have citizen-based taxation. As a Canadian, you can pay the exit tax and get out. But as long as you're a Canadian tax resident, the CRA will still go after you for having a offshore entity or something else of that nature. And so it's really, and the other thing I find really strange too is that the people that do try to escape, the things that are going on, they do get penalized, right? At the end of the day, there's lots of instances where people, they had their tax-free savings account, right? Which in Canada means it's just a special account where you don't get taxed for the capital gains and the maximum amount you can put into it. People found some sort of interesting like financial loopholes that are technically legal under their own legislation that they put in, but the CRA deemed it. They have a special clause in there that says, it's basically like anything that's ridiculous or anything that we deem to be unacceptable. And they basically took them to court for that and made them pay a bunch of penalties. So even at the end of the day, they do figure out the perfect way around the system. They will still come after you based on their own bias. So at that point, it just becomes really hard.
Yeah. What's your antidote? Man, like, what's your solution? Perhaps.
I don't know. I don't know that one exists perfectly. I mean, it's like, I think if you live within Canada as a Canadian tax resident, there's like certain things you can do. Same thing with the United States, where on the end of the day, like you just try to optimize by putting a certain amount of it in Bitcoin, but you just have to realize that you are going to pay a portion of that in capital gains. They're not going to be able to take all of it, right? They're going to be able to take, 50% of that is going to go towards capital gains, and then they might end up taking, 25% of your stack at the end of the day. That's pretty much as good as you can do, like within the country itself. The only other option is to leave, right? It's to leave and do the exit tax and basically choose a jurisdiction where you're paying much less in terms of capital gains tax and income tax, right? And obviously, I know that Paraguay is a good option for that. There's other jurisdictions as well. I've heard great things about Dubai. I know that you were just in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, George. I'm curious to hear what you've learned from that experience on like how people optimize.
Yeah, I think the thing I saw with Abu Dhabi and Qatar, where I first went, was that they're really long-term thinkers and builders, which I think coming back to like the U.S. deficit problem is like, okay, yes, it's a dictatorship. I've said it many times. Okay, yes, family rules is a monarchy, right? One family rules the whole country or emirates, and they put their people in different parts of the government. So if you're not okay with that, I guess you can find somewhere else. But I really like how they're able to think really long term, starting with people who are like a really young age. They're citizens who are young, or they're in from school. They're taught English, like to speak fluent, perfect English, and everybody I met there, whether they're young or they're old, they speak perfect fluent English, at least like Qatarians that I have met at the, in Doha. So, and they're really thinking in terms of decades. They're like, okay, we're like producing gasoline. We know we're also based on gas. And we're telling everyone that we know, we're telling the world that we're trying to get it out of gas and get into something else. And now they saw the perfect opportunity with AI. And they're putting their money where their mouth is, right? And so I think if I'm a Qatari citizen, when I'm at Abu Dhabi and Emirati, I will feel pretty hopeful about the future because for them, it's also about preserving the culture, which is very important in the region. And also second is like making sure the citizens do well, which I think is kind of rare in terms of like that kind of long-term thinking, right?
Well, I feel like we don't have that long-term thinking in the West because of democracy, because it's every 4 years, right? It's just focused on what is the next 4 years going to look like. But it's fascinating to hear that they're thinking about, like they're probably thinking about the next 50 years, 100 years, 150 years. What is that region going to look like? What is their country going to look like? And how are we going to set out our young people for the long term, which is really cool.
Yeah, they're thinking about what's really good for them, right? So like for Qatar, for specifically, they sell this to Qatar Airways, which is now like the best airline in the world, right? And part of the reason why they can do it is because obviously they produce the gasoline, the oil, the jet engines, but still the services and everything else is like world class, right? So they build something that's like good for their brand, and they host the FIFA, and they have Al Jazeera, which is like Arabic and English like media who tell their stories. So everything that they're doing, I can see that they're planning for the next decades to come. And obviously, there are many things in those countries that we might not agree with. And obviously, that's something, that's not a topic for a Western person to think about. I think most, like 99.9% of my experiences there has been awesome.
Well, I think what we can agree with is their viewpoint towards time preference, and it's clear that their time preference is in the long term, and I don't think anyone can argue with that. The longer the time preference you have, um, the better the outcome for society. If you have a group of people that are able to think not only for themselves but think of like their children and their grandchildren being able to have great lives, that's much better than just thinking of the next 4 years. That's always going to result in a better outcome for the society. And I feel like they've been able to optimize for that. Now, is there a great risk because it's all centralized in the family, right? When you get a bad apple in power, that's possible. So that's the risk.
That's the risk I take. Yeah, I do think they have some sort of like internal elections or something to figure out. Like they make sure that whoever is fit to be elected. And I really think I was really impressed by how ego is not a thing there in culture. How like it's not just like whoever has the most influences, whoever those like things that become the leader of a country. Yes, Saudi had a coup. I wasn't there. I'm not sure about Saudi, but at least for Qatar and Abu Dhabi, I was seeing some women are really forward-thinking people, really forward-thinking people. I think that's rare. So I wonder when you think about like our, I know you said our army is doing a great job, which I think like, yes, like looking forward, right? How do you see yourself navigating like these global different countries and different powers?
One thing I've realized is I think as a citizen, there should be some onus on you as well. And what I mean by that is, we keep talking about like, yes, these dictatorships have like long-term vision, but what that allows them to do is that allows them to fail big as well, right? Like, for example, like Saudi failed with like the line that they tried to do. Like the amount, like the smear campaigns that would happen if we ever tried something like that ambitious in like the US or in Canada would be ridiculous, right? Like the amount of media would hate it. And then it would become like a permanent hatred from like a specific facet of citizens saying, okay, we just don't like this government anymore. I think there has to be some level of sympathy from like the citizens. So like me specifically, myself or anybody else, that when like if Mark Carney were to try something big, I would be excited about that. It seems like right now is the moment to try something big. And as much as like this Trump administration has got a lot of flack, the one thing I keep trying to do is give it a little bit of patience to see what they're actually trying to do with this tariff thing. I feel like right now it's so much attacks against them, and all that does is it adds noise, it adds distraction that only a democracy can add to it. Like when we like think about these other cities like Saudi, it seems like it's such a clear thing. And another example, even like public markets, like for example, Facebook, when they had like that Libra coin that they came out with, it wasn't as epic a failure as they could have had, right? But again, Mark Zuckerberg owns such a big portion of it. It doesn't matter. You can just move on, just brush it off. And then so now bringing it back to Canada, when like Mark Carney went to the Trump administration, they had the meeting there. You saw like he was representing Canada well. It seems like he has some sort of a vision. We'll see what it is. He's publicly stated USA doesn't want to lead the world. Canada can. And whatever like he sees in that, I think as citizens, there has to be some level of patience as well. Like if he has a 4-year term, give him the 4 years.
I don't think he has 4 years, but because it's a minority government.
Yeah,
but I guess I wish to do well. I mean, it's only been a month or two, maybe. Has it been? So I guess I'm I think I would say I haven't been very patient with the government. I guess I'm not the most optimistic about it because of the liberal government, right? So I guess I just wasn't optimistic about it. And I heard a lot of talks and stuff. I'm hoping it become true. I guess I'm just doing my best, pulling together.
Yeah, honestly, I've been kind of surprised at his policies that I feel like have been more in line with conservatives. Although at the end of the day, it is a central bank, so I'm not looking at it all that. But you look at it, you've got Trump, who's for crypto, and it's kind of been for us in terms of kind of using that to enrich himself and his friends and the Trump coin. It's kind of like a game of whoever pays kind of gets in, and so that's not great. And the central banker in Canada that's kind of doing more conservative policies. So I mean, we'll just have to play it and see what happens. I'm all for Bitcoin. I'm all for a president being pro Bitcoin. I don't think corruption's great though. So
Yeah.
it's not a big look.
Yeah. Coming from China. Oh, shit. Yeah, it's not. It's a bit difficult to see, I guess. What I'm trying to do myself is I'm just trying to really pull myself away from national big conversations and just trying to think about like things that I control, things I could do well, because I feel like whatever Carney or Trump or whoever it does, I mean, I don't really have a control of that through votes or otherwise, right? Maybe through votes, yes, I can control with that. But I think on larger conversations, there's just like not much you could do given like the things that the things you have planned for yourself. So I just do the best to plan for myself and try to not focus too much on the noise. That's how I think.
Well, the majority are focused on like how do you do the best for your company, how do you set up a Bitcoin treasury, how do you right, and these are the things that you're focused on, right? Like I think that classic meaning Bitcoin is SaaS and focus on the craft, right? Which I think is very accurate. I think the news kind of puts people off every little while, and everyone gets anxious about it. And it's like, maybe you should go outside, get some vitamin D, you work out, focus on the craft and SaaS, and you'll probably live a good life. So
Yeah.
that's the best advice I
Setting
can
goal
give.
is living a good life. I think there's actually many ways you can do it wherever you are, right? Wherever it's like Egypt or Canada or, Norway or, wherever Africa, like wherever it is, I think there's always a way for you to make it and be successful and also be happy, which I think is a very, like, more live a happy life. Which is very important as well. It's your final thing on this.
I agree completely.
Okay. Yeah, I think future is like, I don't know, I wouldn't say future is private, future is fluid, I guess. So it's all up to us.
The future is fluid. Jeez, George. Oh yeah, we might go to Mars or we might blow ourselves out.
That's actually exactly what I meant. Like, future is fluid. We never know what's coming, so I think what we can do is to plan ahead for the better.
I'm inspired, George. The future is fluid. There we go. I think that's not a lot. The future is Bitcoin. Let's go.
I think there's a beauty in like the future being fluid. It means you have like a little bit of say in like being able to build it too, right?
Yeah,
Just
yes. I think I was like, initially I thought like the media was like really putting me towards like Trump being like a dictator. And a part of me actually believed it. Like when it was the first starter, the first like couple weeks, and I really thought, okay, that maybe happen, and I really need to like stop it. All of that. And then and then after all that, like the facts prove it for themselves. It's like, okay, it's not a dictatorship. It's still a function of democracy, and he's just trying to do about the policies that he believes in. So okay, great, moving on. So like I think time always just like corrects itself about things that you don't think you think it is. So like tomorrow I might have a different opinion about something than today. I think it's a part of the process. You always learn. Like I don't think I'm off the way, and it's a beautiful thing.
That's the important thing of the ego. Yeah. People who think they're always right are usually wrong. So
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thanks guys for the episode. And again, audience, if you have any questions, ping us on Twitter and ping us on YouTube or wherever else you can find us. Or actually, also the Spotify comment section. Maybe that's a good way to let us know what you think. Okay, thank you.